on Open Book, Ben Smith, editor-in-chief of Semaphore, but he's also a former media columnist for the New York Times and founding editor-in-chief of BuzzFeed News. But he's now out with a best-selling book, Traffic, Genius, Rivalry, and Delusion in the billion-dollar race to go viral. So, Ben, you've had quite an illustrious career. You know, if you were on Wall Street, you would have been a partner in one of these big firms. Okay, you've done a lot of big jobs, Ben.
I know I made some poor choices in my life, I guess.
Well, no, I'm not saying that. You're at the top of your game, but I'm impressed with the things that you've done and the way you think about the media. So let's just go right there. When you talk about going viral or traffic, when I'm an old guy, so that was like clicks and page views back in the day. But it's a little different now, right? It's a little bit of TikTok virality, Instagram virality, something catches favor, or a meme on Twitter and it goes in an explosive zone. Tell us about what traffic means to you. What did it mean and what does it mean today?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're in this moment of real kind of weird change in really digital media entirely. And I think it's not totally clear what comes next. You know, we're at sort of the end point of what were the huge drivers of traffic. Facebook, first of all, but Twitter was the driver of political kind of attention and conversation. And it's not like those things will turn off the lights tomorrow, but they were the centrally cultural relevant forces for a decade, and they're not anymore, and they're fading. I was at the New York Times as the media columnist, and I left BuzzFeed in 2020. Got to the Times and was just sort of like, what just happened? Like, what did we all just live through? And the book was my attempt to kind of go back to the origin story of this moment where we all became obsessed with traffic and where people, particularly in the worlds I'm most familiar with, which are media and politics, sort of shifted toward this kind of new kind of connection to people on the internet.
So some people would accuse the media of going for the eyeballs and potentially slanting and creating more bias than the media that you and I grew up with, sort of that Columbia School of Journalism objectivity standard. Where do you think things really are? Because I don't want the tribal angle. I want the reality angle.
So I mean, everybody has always liked to complain about the media, and I bet if I talked to you in 2004, you wouldn't have said, "Wow, the media is perfect. I love how they all went to the Columbia School of Journalism." And to me, honestly, this book is more kind of a history, and the way I think about it is more history than kind of diagnosis. I mean, I think if you go back to the beginnings of this moment of thinking of this new generation of digital media, what you had were people who were incredible, readers who hated what they were getting, right? Like you had a choice of a couple of newspapers, a couple of television networks that, conservatives felt like totally didn't represent them, that lots of people felt accurately had totally blown coverage of the Iraq War, the most important story of their generation, and who weren't on the internet, which is where we were all actually talking to each other by then. And so there was this, it wasn't like it came out of nowhere. There was this like popular interest in these new outsider voices that challenged this mainstream consensus. And they, I was part of that, like happily, had also had these new tools of measuring what people were interested in. And of course, journalists had always had the impulse to pander to their audience and to tell people what they want to hear. But suddenly you could really see it. Like you could know what people wanted to hear. And that was a big change. And in some cases, a very kind of, that led some people down a bad path.
I don't want to give away the book. The title of the book is Traffic, Genius, Rivalry, and the Delusion in the billion-dollar race to go viral. But there's some fascinating vignettes in the book, and I'd like you to tease people with it if you don't mind. Let's go right back to Gawker and Nick Denton and the party that you opened the book with. Some people don't even know what Gawker is, Ben. So tell us a little bit about what Gawker is, set the scene for us, and tell us the significance of that vignette.
Yeah, I mean, in that early moment in 2003, say, different people are looking at this. Suddenly, you can kind of like see who's coming to your website and why, and think about what can you give them to make them come back more, and measure it. And one of the people, the pioneers of the space, a guy named Nick Denton, a former British journalist at the Daily Telegraph and the Financial Times, who when he looked at American media, and sort of American culture, he just saw lots of hypocrisy of people who wrote these kind of polite, wooden sounding stories in the New York Times and then went to a bar and trashed the people that they were writing about. And I think his view was like, well, you should be writing what you actually think. Like journalism should be meaner and more, more honest and say what it says. And there were parts of this that honestly to me are still feel really right. Like to me, actually one emblematic one, he kind of accidentally started a feminist blog called Jezebel. And the first thing they did was offer a $10,000 bounty for an unretouched photo of a celebrity in a fashion magazine. And sure enough, like somebody stole a picture from Redbook of Faith Hill, where she still had freckles and smile lines, which had gotten erased in the publication. And they published it, and it was kind of a sensation. And like, that was something that was probably good to get rid of in media in some way, not just obviously in women's magazines, but broadly this kind of photoshopping of reality. But there was also kind of a cruelty to it, a sense of like, well, look, if people just want pornography, we'll just show them pornography, and that's fine. And like a sort of eagerness, almost like a belief in playing to people's worst instincts. And Gawker, which began as kind of a media gossip blog, written by bright young women in New York who were fun writers and very plugged into the moment, and it was this very outsidery voice, gradually became more powerful, more important, more insidery, but kept that cruelty sometimes. And I think kind of became known for like what started to feel like bullying. And its worst was publishing, sex tapes without people's consent.
You see, it's fascinating. And after reading the book, I want to test a theory on you, get your reaction to it. So the media really was the first big movement in decentralization. Once the internet exploded, you had the arrival of Drudge. You yourself were at Politico. You then went over to BuzzFeed, become one of the founders there. And all of a sudden, you didn't need the printing press. You didn't need the papers dropped off and that whole distribution mechanism. You had this sort of viral, decentralized distribution mechanism for your property, if you will, your intellectual property.
Yeah.
I guess some cruelty came with that, though, didn't there, or did there not? And if there did, what was that from? Is that a lack of editor-in-chief saying, whoa, that's too nasty or not objective enough? Or what do you think it was? First of all, am I right on that? And if I'm not right on that,
your basic read that there were, people talk about gatekeepers in media, but like they had gates. Like you owned a printing press, or you owned or you had access to a broadcast tower, and most people didn't. And if you didn't have those things, like that was a gate. It was a real gate. Like gatekeeper, it wasn't kind of a sort of metaphorical, there are gatekeepers in society thing. It was like, well, if you don't have access to a printing press or a broadcast tower, you can't send your message widely. And that really changed. And there were these new people. Nick Denton was one of them. Jonah Peretti, the founder of BuzzFeed, was another, who had kind of like really, who had ideas about what people would want in this new space. And for Denton, it was this kind of, rawness and unreserved exposure, which often was cruel. Peretti, who I worked for at BuzzFeed, had this ttotally different point of view that in some ways was accurate, in other ways totally diluted, which was that he was the first to really see the social internet coming, the Facebooks and the Twitters, in the sense that the main way that your content will be distributed is somebody will share it with a friend, somebody will share it on a social platform, and you've got to be thinking, what will people share? And his initial theory was people will share things that make them look good to their friends. They'll share appeals for earthquake relief. They'll share cute memes and cat pictures and funny jokes. They'll share like kind of thoughtful articles. They'll share new news. That's what he hired me to get. But they would certainly not go on these platforms and scream about politics, because like, who wants to be that person? Who wants to look to their friends like some maniac yelling about divisive politics all the time? I mean, that obviously turned out to be a massive mistake. And that was all people wanted to use these platforms for.
Yeah, no, listen, I mean, I find the whole thing fascinating. Obviously, I'm a media aficionado.
Well, you're now a media participant.
I spent a lot of time consuming the media. I spend some time getting attacked by the media. It's all good. I'm a big proponent of free speech, and so people can write whatever they want. And people are upset with me right now because I see no problem with CNN bringing on Donald Trump. I don't like Donald Trump. I certainly don't want him to be president. But let me tell you, he's the leading Republican figure, and he's a congenital liar. But he's going to be part of the mix in 2024. and we're a free speech society, so we have to sort of live with these things. I just want to ask you about mythology, if you don't mind.
Please.
If I say Ariana Huffington, we see sort of a left wing rival to Matthew Drudge and the Drudge Report. But if I say Andrew Breitbart, because of his death, I think it means different things to different people. You knew Andrew personally. I had a relationship with him as well. I don't see him the way he is lionized today, but I'm just curious what your reaction is. Has he been mythologized in any way? Who was Andrew
Yeah.
Breitbart for the young people that may not know him or know him personally?
He was, I mean, I think maybe it's in some ways more interesting to start with the myth, which is I think he's now seen as the father of contemporary conservative media. He had kind of an appetite for confrontation and a belief that politics starts in culture and in fights over kind of divisive cultural subjects, which may sound a little familiar to people. And people who can, he, there was, when he died, I think it was in 2012, I believe, the people around him included Steve Bannon, who took over Breitbart, pulled it into this very kind of divisive and political direct support, full-on support for Donald Trump. It included Ben Shapiro, who went into this a direction that maybe was more about fighting the culture wars and producing something that connected with young people and young conservatives, but lots of people came out of his orbit, all of whom kind of fight, I think in some ways try to claim his legacy and say what it was. I mean, he was this very complicated, difficult guy who had this strange experience of he was in Hollywood and kind of a misfit in Hollywood because he was a conservative, and got really addicted to this like early internet conversation on these message boards where this guy named Matt Drudge was sending around an email of updates of like anti-Clinton theories and stuff. And he was obsessed with Drudge, who was in many ways like a real breakthrough in the sort of tension between this wide open digital media and this sort of closed off traditional media. And he broke out when he heard that Newsweek was working on this story about Monica Lewinsky. And as Newsweek is deliberating about publishing it, Drudge just publishes it. And pretty soon after that, Andrew goes to work for him kind of as this anonymous minion. Like he's getting paid kind of irregularly, like whenever Drudge feels like sending him a check. He's he has all this power of having access for like 6 hours a day to the most important political platform in the country, but nobody knows who he is except for like occasional journalists like me who cotton onto it and started sending him links to our stories. And there was this moment I guess when was the Janet Jackson Super Bowl
The
wardrobe
2007
malfunction?
Super Bowl, yep.
Wardrobe
malfunction. Yep.
Somebody told me they were at a party with him, and he and he's there like programming the national conversation on this crazy thing that just happened. The language he's using on the Drudge Report is immediately on television, but no one at this party knows who the hell he is. And he tried to get out from Drudge's shadow in various ways. He co-founded Huffington Post with Ariana, which was meant to be a left-wing Drudge Report. He then founded Breitbart.com, which at first was trying to sort of siphon traffic and money off of the Drudge Report. It was a sort of a side hustle that Drudge granted him. And then eventually launched a set of blogs which were modeled on Gawker, on Nick Denton's Gawker, both in their structure and in that their big scoop was, a picture of Anthony Weiner's genitals, which was a very Gawker-y thing to do.
Yeah. Well, I remember that well, and I got the date wrong. I said 2007. It's a sign of old age, Ben. It was the 2004 January Super Bowl.
Right.
She was with Justin Timberlake, and obviously she had her famous wardrobe malfunction. So as crazy as that sounds, almost 20 years ago now, which seems like it was yesterday. But I had met Andrew at a David Koch conference. Now, the Kochs have also been mythologized, but back then, and just so everybody's clear, who paid tribute to Andrew Breitbart at his funeral, it would have included the likes of Mitt Romney, who is now a supposed rhino, but back then was sort of in the bell curve of conservatism. Of course, the Kochs now have been demonized, but I would have thought of them in 2009, 10, and 11 as more in the bell curve of conservatism.
Yeah.
And so here's the optimal question for you. Has the media contributed to spinning things out, or were things spinning out of control anyway? or was the segmentation and the decentralization that you describe in your book creating the political environment, or vice versa, or how are they harmonious with each other?
Yes. Is that the right answer to that question? I
Maybe,
mean,
maybe yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
I
So
think
the media
basically,
had something to do with it, right?
of course. And I think, I mean, you of all people, I think, kind of understand the extent to which these lines that people imagine between, there's this thing called politics, there's this thing called technology, there's something called business, there's something else called the media. Like those are fake lines. That's not how power works. That's not, and in fact, these things flow into each other very naturally, and they're effect, and the same trends run through all of them. And like in, and I think that's really what, when you sort of step back and look at the story of the sort of period that I wrote about, it's, you know, these deep changes in, particularly in digital media, but also in society, this collapse in trust in institutions that isn't just media institutions, rise in kind of individual voices, whether it's, you know, whether and you know, and the institutions that are being replaced by individuals include the media, they include the Republican Party, where Donald Trump is more important than the party, and all these trends sort of run together, and I think are really amplified in that kind of 2015 to 2017 period, in particular, by decisions made technically at the social platforms, Facebook in particular, that they're seeing this rise in what they see as engagement. And from their perspective, you know, they want you spending 4 minutes on their site. They think that they can get you to spend 4 minutes and 30 seconds a day if they make some tweaks. Like, they're not thinking we want to elect some kind of politician or other. But what they do is provide this very rich platform for essentially, you know, for something that is very well suited to right-wing populism, to this kind of confrontational, provocative stuff where, like, if whether I like it or I hate it, I'm like, I want to write a comment and say fuck you, or say this is great, and the system then sees, wow, this guy is really engaged, let's show him more like that. And I think, you know, I think there were a lot of forces in society that, and real things people were angry about, driving it too. And cable news is, you know, part of this system too. It's not like there's some one factor, but certainly this all played out on social media. And actually, one of the big ironies, like, because, you know, I spent a lot of time in the book covering these new digital sites, notably the Huffington Post, that had sprung up to help Democrats, and that were that were progressive, and that saw the internet as, like, obviously is for young people and Democrats and progressives. And the election of Barack Obama is very naturally the culmination of the new media. I think that's how people saw it in the aughts. And in 2011, Obama went to visit Facebook. And he kind of went without saying, like, oh, Facebook's a democratic institution. It's where college kids are. It's like visiting a campus. You know, it, like, and I think that was just this huge misunderstanding of what digital media was going to do. And in fact, the sort of politician who used it best, the movement that used it best, was Trump.
Well, let me say this, and I want to get test you. I mean, I think because you have such insight into this and you're so real and honest about it. Are we at a point in time? I don't know, maybe 30, 40, could even be 50 years ago. David Halberstam wrote the book, The Powers That Be. There's just this great book about centralized media. I think he had Henry Luce in the book and Bill Paley, and there was centralized media, and there was, frankly, some coordination with the American politicians. As an example, you know, Franklin Roosevelt, they never showed him in the wheelchair. Sort of, that was okay. Jack Kennedy had his share of adulterous affairs. They sort of left that in a quote unquote lockbox somewhere. That era obviously is gone, never to come back. But I guess what I'm wondering is the era of our national unity also gone, because when you had the centralized media, and that was a centralized light beam into everybody's home, there was more of a unifying message. We sometimes say to each other, wow, we can't even debate anymore because I'm getting my facts from Fox News. You may be getting your facts from MSNBC or vice versa. And so now we don't even have the same facts when we come to the debate stage. Am I right about this? Am I wrong about this? Is there a cure for this, or what is the outcome, and how do you think it affects our national unity and our current tribalism?
That's a good question. I mean, I do think that that era that's gone, that people remember more fondly than honestly they experienced it. lots of people, including like conservatives and people who cared about civil rights and lots of others, felt like totally shut out by that sort of shared facts zone, and those shared facts weren't always facts. But I do think that era is over. But I think the era we all just lived through is over too, where you have this unbelievably divisive landscape all playing out on Facebook and on Twitter and on one platform, and we're headed into something more splintered, but maybe a little less divisive and shouty too. I think podcasts like this are part of it. People are finding voices they connect with and trust, and looking for help synthesizing all the chaos out there, rather than wanting just to
Listen,
like immerse themselves and swim in the chaos. I mean, that's, I started this new thing, Semaphore, and that's how we're thinking about it a lot.
I was just going to say that I think Semaphore represents that, because let's go there for a second. What does Semaphore represent? I find the writing in Semaphore, you guys seem to be first to the news. I give you a lot of credit on scooping, but I think you're also laying it out there fairly objectively. Am I getting it wrong, or are you coming at it from a slant that I'm not totally getting? And I think I'm pretty good at reading the slant.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying. I mean, I hope. Yes, I mean, it's Semaphore. I mean, I think our goal. I mean, I don't think anybody buys that like we can create a new class of news robots who just tell you the facts as they are with no perspective. And so I think what we're trying to do is say, we're reporters who know what we're talking about, but and we can get, we can break news, we can tell you things you didn't know, and we'll also tell you what we think about that, what we think it means, that like we think Scaramucci totally screwed this thing up. But also we want to recognize, like, we could be wrong about that. We're not going to be wrong about the facts. But
well, I mean, enough people have written that about me. I don't think you guys need to.
And if somebody else thinks you did a fabulous job, we're going to go out of our way to find somebody who disagrees with us and include their voice too. And if there's perspectives from other countries, from other angles, we're going to try to sort of pull all that stuff together. Because I think part of the experience of reading the news now is thinking, like, what isn't this publication telling me? Like, this all seems too simple. Like, what's the alternate point of view? And then you read something in the New York Times and you go out and Google the same story to like read it a few other places and try to triangulate what's going on. And I think our sort of perspective is we want to help you do that rather than try to feed you a kind of simpler story or simpler perspective.
I think it's very, very fair. I want to go to the subtitle of this book. It's Genius, Rivalry, and the Delusion in the billion-dollar race to go viral. So I want to go to Delusion first, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And then we'll go to Rivalry and Genius, but let's focus on Delusion. Who are the most deluded?
I mean, I think that the people, Jonah Peretti, Nick Denton, me, like everybody who thought that we could kind of ride this tiger, and both that we could exercise some level of control over it, but also that the people running these big platforms, Mark Zuckerberg in particular, would ultimately want to align them with professional journalism and professional entertainment, that it was going to be in their interest to, like the way the cable operators, created an environment where CNN and ESPN and MTV could thrive, that these new social platforms would ultimately need to create an environment where journalism could thrive, among other things. Just wasn't true. Like, that was a mistake. I don't know if it was it was a delusion or just wrong, but that was a huge error. And that's why I think you look around, you see Vice, you see BuzzFeed, you see all these places really struggling.
I think what makes something a delusion is that you have some certainty, or you at least have some belief that it's going to go a certain way when the facts represent otherwise. I mean, there was delusion on the Trump campaign in 2016 about the ability to control the president, who was going to control him. I had dinner. I went with General Kelly to the Marine Corps Scholarship Foundation dinner 2 weekends ago. And we were obviously reminiscing about my firing, but we were also reminiscing about the Trump administration and how difficult it was, but how we were all delusional. Okay, so delusion is an interesting word. We can get things wrong, and sometimes we get it wrong not because the facts are wrong, but because of our prism in terms of looking at the facts. We have a tendency to want to alter it to fit a truth that we may believe. I guess where I'm going from in that, Ben, what is the thing that you all were guided to? What you thought you were going to be the next Time magazine virtually? you thought? Like, what was the vision at
No,
the
I mean,
time?
it really was the idea that just as like, the advent of printing had created this whole profusion of newspapers like that hadn't existed before of the certain kind of like mass ability to print and the um, and particularly though cable, just to dwell on that and go back to it because it's hard to understand how people were thinking, particularly like what were investors who put hundreds of millions of dollars into new media thinking? Like, how do you explain that? And the actual answer is cable. People laid wires in the ground, and they thought, and they need and they needed all this content to fill those new pipes, and they hired MTV and ESPN to do that, and they built huge businesses and made enormous amounts of money. And I think people who were investing in that space, that was fundamentally what they thought was going to happen, that these were new permanent pipes for the transmission of information, Facebook and Twitter and Snap and Pinterest and whatever. And
I think it's fascinating. I think it makes your book your book is great, even for people that are not interested in journalism, just interested in business and the current zeitgeist. The book is phenomenal. We're running out of time here. I want to go to my 5 words. So every one of my authors gets 5 words, Ben, and then you need to react to those 5 words, sort of like the Malcolm Gladwell blink sort of a thing.
All right.
I say the word and then you say blank. Ready?
All right.
Let's start. BuzzFeed.
Viral. Are we we're free associating here, or should I like talk for a while?
Yeah, no, free associate. Yeah, viral, right? Viral is what you
Sure.
think. I say BuzzFeed, you say viral.
Okay.
How about Vice? I say Vice, you say what?
Brand. Very pure brand.
Okay. Facebook.
Out of fashion.
Okay, so Facebook has jumped the shark. What about Semaphore?
Please sign up.
All right, that could be your best one. Okay, I gotta go to one subject, which is a thorny one for me, and less so probably for you. But let's go to Sam Bankman-Fried. I say Sam Bankman-Fried. You say what? I'll tell you what I say. I say betrayal. I mean, that's my one word. But what do you say?
Yeah, I mean, I feel that way too. I mean, I didn't have the kind of he invested in our company and I didn't have the kind of complicated relationship or exposure that you guys did. But also, yeah, I mean, he really presented himself as something he wasn't.
Yeah, which
and obviously created huge headaches for all his business partners.
Gonna happen. Okay, in our last 30 seconds, I don't know anything about the media. I'm in the bookstore on Amazon. I see the title Traffic, Genius, Rivalry, and Delusion in the $1 billion race to go viral. I'm buying the book because why, Ben Smith?
Because it tells you how we got here.
I think that's it. I mean, it's an excellent examination of the social zeitgeist, and it'll get you right up to speed on where we are and potentially where we're going. You wrote a phenomenal book. I wish you great success with it. And thank you for joining us today on Open Book.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is really fun. It's good.
Joining us now on Open Book is Kurt Wagner, award-winning business and technology journalist for Bloomberg. But what a book. Okay, this book is called Battle for the Bird. Great title. Jack Dorsey, Elon Musk, and the $44 billion fight for Twitter's soul. Well, I don't really know where to start with this, actually, because I read the book. I felt like it was a little bit of a thriller and a page turner. You're probably too young, Kurt, to remember Barbarians at the Gate. Do you remember Barbarians at the Gate?
Fun story. I'm reading it as we speak.
Okay, so there you go. Okay, so for viewers and listeners that are younger than me demographically, that's a story from 1988, 89 about the takeover of RJR Reynolds, which was an old school tobacco and Nabisco biscuit company. And what a battle of egos. And here we are 35 years later, and we're reading about what I would call a web sort of Barbarians in the Gate. Do I have that right? I mean, that's how I felt. That's how I felt about your book.
That's part of why I'm reading it, actually. Someone else made a similar comparison, and I had read bits and pieces of Barbarians at the Gate, but it's a long book. It's like 500 pages, and I never made it through, I have to admit. But I was like, well, if someone's going to be kind enough to sort of liken my book to that one, I really need to give this another chance. And so I picked it back up. I'm a little more than halfway through it right now. But I think you're right. Like, there's a lot of similarities in the sense that it's it's a leveraged buyout. This ultimately is what Elon did, a leveraged buyout of Twitter, and a ton of personalities involved, competing opinions about where this could or should go. And so I do see why the comparison gets tossed out, which is flattering. I will say it's a great book.
Well, I'm glad someone else felt the same way. I love the book. That book went on to become an HBO series. I predict you're going to get picked up. I know you did this in the middle of the writer's strike, but my guess is the story is just too good, Kurt. And I also often tell my authors I don't like giving away too much of these books because I want people to go out and buy your book. The purpose of my podcast is to introduce an author, get people excited about reading. And I feel you did so much homework and research on this book. We owe it to you to read it. But let's start with you for a second. What made you pick this? It's a crazy struggle when you get down to it. You had to put it all together. What made you decide to write the book first, and then we'll get into a little bit of it.
Well, I wanted to write a book about Twitter before Elon came into the picture, to be honest with you. I'd been covering Twitter for almost a decade at this point and always sort of thought, well, if I was going to go the book route, Twitter would be a logical subject for me. I've just covered the company, and the story is actually quite interesting and captivating even before Elon showed up. And so I had, set my sights on writing this sort of Jack Dorsey Twitter book. And as I was out pitching it to publishers, like literally the same week I was out pitching this book idea to publishers, Elon showed up as the largest shareholder of Twitter. And I continually kept sort of telling myself, well, I'll just add a chapter to the end, or, okay, now I'll add two chapters to the end. And eventually I got around to the idea that it was okay, this is a totally different story than I had originally set out to sell. And you'll probably see in the book, there's really it's two parts. The first half is really the pre-Elon years, and a lot of things that happened that set up the opportunity for him to show up and buy this company. And then the second part of the book is really when Elon arrives on the scene.
So, I'm gonna say something to you, and I want you to react to it. Okay. So I was at Goldman Sachs for 7 years. And, I believed that I was going to start my own business. I remember telling my dad, who was a blue collar worker, I said, Dad, I'm going to start a business. It's going to be great. There's going to be no politics. There's too much politics at Goldman Sachs. And then Kurt, the minute I had 6 employees, I had politics, and then I said, and we're going to be doing things differently at our firm. And then the minute things got hectic, I went right to the Goldman Sachs playbook and compliance book and replicated it. And I find fascinating about your book is whatever you think of Dorsey and his team, they put in some protocols and they put in some ways of doing business and some guardrails. Elon is a genius. There's no question about that. He thinks differently than all of us. He's arguably one of the richest people in the world. But do we sometimes get our ego in play to the extent where we think we know better than people who actually may be more experienced than we are in a field that we're looking at?
Yeah.
What say you?
I would agree. And I think in Elon's case, the issue was actually that he tried to take a playbook that had worked for him at Tesla and SpaceX and sort of force it on Twitter, even though the problems at Twitter are just so different. They require a totally different type of thinking and skill set, right? They're more of a soft skill problems, communication, human interaction, speech, free speech, those kinds of things. And Elon approached it like an engineer. And he was like, we're going to sleep at the office and we're going to run as fast as humanly possible and get these things shipped as fast as possible. And I just don't think that, the playbook that worked to get the Tesla Model 3 out the door, for example, is the same playbook you can use at a company like Twitter. And, we saw that, in my opinion, be a major problem for him in those first couple months after the takeover.
Okay. So we have an engineer in Elon Musk. We have this sort of maverick Bitcoiner in Jack Dorsey. They seem similar to me. Is that a problem for them in terms of the way they clash with each other, or what am I missing? Well, let me rephrase it. What is different and similar about Elon Musk and Jack Dorsey, and describe their relationship to our viewers and listeners? How's that?
Sure. I'll start actually with the differences because I think they're more stark. which is just the management style of these two guys, right? So Jack Dorsey, as we learn in the book, he's introverted. He doesn't like making decisions. His management style is essentially to be hands off and let the people who work for him run the show, while he sort of serves as this advisor, at the top, more of like a big thinker type guy. And I never got the sense that he really wanted to be the CEO of publicly traded companies. It's sort of like something he almost fell into, which is bizarre because he had two of those jobs at the same time. And then you look at Elon, right? And he's someone who moves incredibly quickly. He's very decisive, not always the right decision, but he makes a decision and he goes for it. And, he is the ultimate decision maker. Like, the people who work for him are implementing his vision and not the other way around. So in terms of differences, that's where I feel like management style is very different. Now, where they're similar, they're both founders, they're both technologists, they're both incredibly rich, right? So they have this freedom to think about things in a way much longer term, much bigger picture than most of us do, because we just don't have the financial freedom to sit around and pontificate, where's Bitcoin going to be in 20 years because you're trying to pay rent or whatever it may be, right? So I think where they sort of aligned was that they had this big sort of grand idea of what Twitter could be. And I think there were some similarities in their visions for Twitter, even if the way that they chose to execute it, were very different. And so this was a relationship. I've spent a lot of time in the book, as you know, like focused on this relationship, because I feel like without Jack Dorsey sort of encouraging Elon to buy Twitter and sort of welcoming him to come in and buy Twitter, I don't know if a deal actually gets done. And so that's why I spent so much time talking about those two guys.
Yeah. I mean, listen, they're two brilliant guys. My next follow-up question there, I'm going to go in another direction. I just turned 60 this year. Somebody asked me, what's my observation? I sort of feel like people that have earned this amount of money, something happens to their brain. It's almost like the old drug commercial. When I was a kid, they used to crack an egg and say, this is your brain. And then they would put the egg in a frying pan and say, this is your brain on drugs. I feel that money does that to people. I feel like it smokes their brain a little bit, where they think that they're superior or they think that they're smart. I'm watching it with some billionaires in sports. They believe that they know more than the baseball or football or hockey operators. Am I missing something, or do sometimes rich people get in the way of themselves as a result of the ego of being rich?
It's funny you say that, because a colleague of mine just talked to me about the book last week in New York, and literally she called it billionaire brain. She was like, what is this billionaire brain thing that happens to people? And I think you're totally right. And I think it's two things. Well, it might be more than that, but I've identified, I think, like two main things. The first is you're reluctant to surround yourself with anybody because you kind of lose trust with most people, right? They're either trying to get something from you, or they're trying to manipulate you or whatever. So I feel like people isolate themselves a little bit more when they get to that point, because they don't trust many people. And then
there's no question. You're fearful that people are climbing onto you for money or digging gold on you.
Exactly.
I understand that.
So then you have a smaller circle, and people want to be in that small circle. So then the other thing that happens is they don't actually give you any real feedback, right? They just agree with everything you say, or if they do give you feedback, they do it in a very gentle way that might not even change your opinion, right? So we saw this with Elon in particular when he was taking over Twitter. He had this sort of small group of advisors he brought with him, personal friends, relationships from other companies. And everything that I heard was essentially he'd sort of have a bad idea and they'd be like, yes, that's the best idea ever. Go forward, go do that. You should totally do it. Instead of someone being like, well, wait a minute, let's think this thing through. Like, this might not actually be a good idea. But when, you have a small group of people and those people just continue to encourage every idea that pops into your head, I think it's, creates that billionaire brain thing, because you're no longer getting the feedback you probably need.
I mean, it's just fascinating, right? Billionaire brain. It's interesting because, and by the way, all of us, billionaires or not billionaires, we can get our egos into our decision making. I certainly did that when I joined the White House. I had this vision of me working for the president and blah, blah. And of course, it didn't work out for me. But I do feel that I put too much of my ego into the decision making, and it was very costly to me. So that's a cautionary tale for people that I get out of your book. Let's go to the following equation. Jack Dorsey's indecisiveness plus Elon Musk's impulsiveness equals what?
Yeah. Well, the indecisiveness was a major problem for years because Twitter simply didn't innovate fast enough. As a result, it didn't grow fast enough and its business lagged behind. So this indecisiveness is one of the key reasons that Twitter was in a position to be acquired, right? It had not achieved its potential because, in my opinion, Jack Dorsey as the leader was not making these affirmative, decisive decisions. Flip that on its head with Elon and the impulsiveness, and you see the destruction of some of the stuff that was actually, in my opinion, working at Twitter. So even though Twitter was a small business, they had a pretty stable, solid brand advertising business, right? A lot of big brands wanted to be on Twitter because it's where people talked about the Super Bowl and the World Cup and the Oscars and all of these like things that are happening in real time. It was a great complement to watching on television. But Elon Musk's, I guess, ability or inability to filter himself ultimately has scared off a lot of those advertisers because he goes on Twitter and just tweets whatever pops into his head. And there's a lot of people, marketers, who don't want to be associated with that, right? So where Jack's slowness kind of set Twitter up, struggled business-wise, I think Elon sort of not reading the room and understanding that his own impulsive behavior has a negative effect on the company is destroying the business that they have right now. And so obviously two different approaches, but two very similar outcomes, which is Twitter is underachieving as a business in both cases.
Okay. So this is a central thought of mine. Free speech. You're for free speech? I'm assuming you are. You're a journalist.
Of course, yeah. Yep.
Okay. So I'm for free speech. But help me. Okay, because
Yeah.
I had to take con law in school, and there's a lot of different types of speech. Some of it's protected, some of it isn't. Obviously, hate speech wouldn't be. I can't put you in harm's way. The proverbial yell fire in the theater. What does Elon Musk get right, and what does he get wrong about free speech on his new business, formerly known as Twitter?
I think what he gets right is probably that old Twitter 1.0, had probably over-indexed on its rules, right? Quite frankly, I think we have the benefit of hindsight now, but you look at what happened in 2020 with COVID and the election and the reaction to the election from then President Trump, and we saw Twitter like really, really get a lot more strict on its rules. And I think like in the moment, given the severity and the extreme things that were happening, I think it to some people it was justified, right? And I think you could look back now and say, well, maybe they were a little too forceful with some of that stuff. And I don't think it's crazy for Elon to come in and say, I feel like there are too many rules and I want to sort of, rescind some of these. I don't have a problem with that. But what I do think he's missed is the fact that the rules exist not just, for the company to feel good about itself. There's a business reason to have these things, right? Like more users want to show up at a place where they feel safe, where they're not going to be attacked, where they are not going to be exposed to, ridiculous conspiracy theories or whatever. And so there's a business reason to have some of these rules. I don't think, he has really thought that through. Or if he has, he just says, well, we're just going to suffer the business consequences of letting people sort of say whatever they want. And, people are free to leave, of course, if they don't feel that the place reflects their own values. And that's what some of them are doing. And so it's just I think what I've learned from doing this book is how difficult the balancing act is, right? You want to uphold free speech. You want to let people say what's on their mind. But at the same time, you got to build a business, and a business requires some level of pruning, right? And some level of kind of cleaning these things up. And no one has really succeeded in navigating that perfectly. I don't think anyone would, to be clear, but it's just a really tough thing that I don't think outsiders fully appreciate. They feel like the service should reflect whatever they personally believe and anything else is wrong. But those beliefs are a huge,
well,
huge
we're in
spectrum.
that society now. We're in that tribal society now. So we want to play to the band or sing to the chorus, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
I learned so many different things from your book. I'm going to start with a couple, and I just want you to get your reaction.
Sure.
What did I learn from your book? I learned that these things are way more complicated, aren't they? Setting up free speech. You just set that as an example. I learned that this deal could have been very successful for Elon Musk because he is a great innovator, but he went in the wrong direction, as explained in your book. How did he go in the wrong direction, if you believe that's the case?
I do. I feel like what Twitter was best at, and maybe this is unique to your one-time position in the White House, what I do for a living, but like Twitter was great at news. Like if you cared about news, Twitter was the place you went. You had to be there. You had to have an account. And I feel like Elon has sort of said, he's got beef obviously with the media right now, certainly like sort of the mainstream media. And I kind of feel like he's saying, I want to make this less useful for news because I'm going to stick it to, some of these journalists who have been either critical of me or who he disagrees with. But the problem is that was what made Twitter super sticky and unique to people. And so I get the sense he's sort of gone away from the thing that it was best at. And, you add that on top of the business struggles we talked about with the advertising and sort of how Elon has run off some advertisers. I think the idea of subscriptions actually isn't a bad idea, but I think the way he rolled them out as quickly as he did without thinking through the potential ramifications of taking away check marks, for example, or selling check marks without any kind of identity verification. Like these are the kinds of things when I said he moves fast, but almost in a reckless way, like these are ideas that could have worked, in my opinion, had they been handled very differently. I just feel like the execution was poor.
Okay. Last thing on this topic of what I learned. You can really damage a brand. And you could put a brand in a non-recoverable position. I'm not saying he's not going to be successful with X, but when I look at X today, it is very different than what Twitter once was. And so I want you, for our viewers and listeners, to describe, again, your opinion, what Twitter once was with Jack Dorsey and what X is today under Elon Musk. It feels like a totally different experience to me. And I've been on the platform for 15 years. So tell us what you think the differences are.
Yeah, I think if you just look at the actual product, I don't think it looks that different. I don't think the way you interact with the app is all that different. But the feeling you get on the app is totally night and day different, in my opinion. And again, I think Twitter used to lean very heavily into the "it's what's happening" slogan or tagline, right? You would expect to go there and see the discussion at the top of your feed be about, today or this week would be State of the Union, right? We're about to hear the State of the Union from President Biden. And you would think, okay, there's sort of what's happening in the US today. Therefore, that's what's going to be at the top of my feed. What I think Elon has tried to do, and what he's actually said publicly, is that he wants Twitter to be the most entertaining app that people use, right? So it's no longer, in my opinion, about usefulness. It's not really about opening it up and getting exactly what I feel that I need that day. It's more about feeling entertained, right? So I see, tons of memes on there. I see tons of videos that have nothing to do with like news or what's happening. They're just sort of recycled videos that are either, head scratchers or they're funny or whatever it may be. It kind of feels like he wants to be like a TikTok light or something like that, where you're more scrolling to be entertained than you are to be informed. That's my personal opinion. I'm actually curious, since you're a user yourself and you said you've seen a difference, like what's the difference in your mind between the two? Because again, the product itself feels sort of similar as in the way that you use it.
Well, I feel certain things are boosted. Maybe I'm wrong. I think the good news for me is I was shadow banned on Twitter. I was a Trump supporter. And so I got shadow banned. And so I got unclipped from that. And so I was modulated and throttled down to a low ability to gain followers. He very fairly unclipped that. And so now I get followers and my stuff that I tweet out reaches a lot of people. And so I wasn't in love with that about Twitter, but I feel like there's a lot of boosting going on of conspiracy theory, maybe.
Yeah.
I feel a lot of sludges on there, a lot of nonsense, made up stuff, I feel bad about this because I really don't believe Elon Musk is an anti-Semite, but I do feel there's a lot of anti-Semitic activity going on Twitter now, way more than there was prior. Okay. And, this is the problem, though. Someone like Elon Musk, people don't want to say that to because they don't want to offend him. And he's a powerful guy and blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean? But I mean,
Totally.
if I was sitting in a boardroom with him, I'd be like, look, you've done a really good job of trying to flatten the playing field between conservatives and liberals. And I respect that. But we probably need to clean up on aisle 7 of all the conspiracy theories. I mean, you think the Rothschilds run the world? I don't think they do. But if you follow X, you've got a good 10% of the tweets that come into my field of vision. The Rothschilds are running the world. That's a anti-Semitic trope that's lasted
Totally.
300 years. I'm not in love with that.
Well, and that's the trade-off between the free speech and
That's true.
the cleanup, right? Is like,
That's true.
Example of one, right? But like X is less interesting to you. I'm sort of speaking for you now, but and and partly because they are not policing in the way that old Twitter did, right? And so, but old Twitter over policed, and so now you're sort of like, okay, how do we, draw that line? How do you find that balance? And again, everyone's going to be different, but that's the fear, is that the more you let people say whatever they want, and say, I might not agree with it, but it should be allowed to be on there. Well, people just don't want to be surrounded by that stuff, right? And so they use the product less, or they leave altogether. And this is the dilemma that Elon will continue to face.
Okay. So, before I brought you on, and before we had the recording start, we know that Fidelity, I believe, who made an investment alongside of Elon Musk at a $44 billion valuation, marked the investment down to $12 billion.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. You think it's worth $12 billion?
There's a lot of debt on those books still. You have to remember that Twitter took on about, I want to say is like $12 billion in debt to get this deal done. So, and which they're paying back, for many more years. So 12 billion honestly feels a little high for me. We don't know exactly what the revenue is because it's a private company, so they don't share that. I had a story in December that said that they were targeting around $2.5 billion in advertising revenue last year, which was down almost 50%. So, you see a company that's bringing in, if we're generous, maybe $2.5-3 billion in revenue, but has tons of debt on the books, and as you point out, a lot of other kind of cultural problems right now. I don't know if you could sell it for 12 billion. Maybe I'm being too harsh, but it seems a little high to me.
Okay. So, but he's not interested in selling it. So let's fast forward a second. Okay. Here's a guy that took, it's one of the big misses of my life. One of my best friends, Antonio Gracias, was on the board of SpaceX and Twitter. Now I think he's just on one of them. He gave me the opportunity to invest 20 years ago, and of course I was too stupid. He went on to become a billionaire, and I'm talking to you on open book. See, that's why I'm really not that smart. But he's a lovely guy, and I would never bet against Elon Musk. And so we know that Tesla and SpaceX were on the brink of bankruptcy 16 years ago during the 2008 financial crisis. And he went on to become the richest, or one of the richest people in the world, and he is a brilliant guy. So it's at 12, maybe less today. Where do you think it will be in 5 years? You think it's lights out for X? You think he can turn this around? What do you think?
I agree with you that I don't think it's going away. I mean, I don't foresee Elon throwing in the towel or anything like that at this point. One theory that's sort of interesting, I don't know if you follow it, but he has an AI company that he's just spun up, XAI, which makes Grok the chat GPT type competitor. Mm-hmm. And they're using Twitter data, or X data, I should say, to train those models. And there's an interesting idea about sort of folding X, the social network, into XAI and, making it the training ground for the AI products that they ultimately build, but sort of take the pressure off of X as this like standalone thing that, might need to become profitable, because it's now more of a feature of this other AI company. And I think that's something that could very well happen. And that's a good outcome, I would say, or I would guess that would be a very good outcome for investors too, right? Because now suddenly they're sort of on the AI wave instead of this fledgling social network that no one's really sure what to do with. And so I could see Elon being creative, trying to do something like that to try and sort of save the financials of this company. I just worry that X is going to become less and less relevant over time unless they can kind of figure out how to fix the problem that you were just talking about, right? Which is that a lot of people feel that when they go on, they see stuff they don't want to see, and it makes them use it less and less. And so they got to figure that out. Otherwise, I'm worried the relevance is going to be a problem.
Okay. We're at the point in this podcast now where I have 5 words. My producer and I, we come up with them. And then we ask the author to react to these 5 words. It could be a sentence, a word, sort of like a Rorschach test on your book.
Great.
You ready?
Let's do it.
All right. I'm going to say free speech. You say what?
Complicated.
Really complicated, isn't it? It's fascinating, right?
It is.
You get a lot wrong being a free speecher.
Yeah.
I'm going to say Elon Musk. You say what?
I'm going to say has some work to do.
Right. I say resilient, brilliant, visionary. Now, he's human, so he has flaws like the rest of us.
Totally.
And if I were a friend of Elon Musk, which unfortunately I'm not, I would love to be, but I would say, hey, surround yourself with some say no people as opposed to just yes people.
Yeah.
Jack Dorsey.
Ooh. I would say kind of the villain, honestly. Like part of the story here is this rise from Jack Dorsey as being a beloved kind of person within Twitter, beloved to employees, sort of the face of the company in many ways, to, being a bit of a villain to at least to people who feel that they're disappointed in the way that Twitter has gone. So, I want to be clear. This is not all Jack Dorsey's fault by any stretch or anything like that, but I do think his story arc has sort of gone in the wrong direction over the last couple of years. And so that's why that word popped into my head.
It's interesting, it's because I see him and I have empathy for him because I'm not well suited to be the White House communications director. I may be decent at talking on TV and I may be decent at managing money, but I'm probably not well suited for all the muck and guck of politics. And Dorsey's a visionary, but is he the best operator for a business like that? Maybe he isn't, maybe he's just straight outside of his circle of competence. I don't know, but I have empathy for him. And I do love the fact that he was wearing that Satoshi t-shirt, Kurt Wagner.
At the Super Bowl.
Okay. Yeah. That was good for me. Okay.
One other word. Sorry, if I could add one other quick word. Please. I almost went with idealist because the other thing about Jack is like, he really does have this sort of pure mind in terms of where he thinks a lot of these things can go. It's just, they don't always materialize in the way that, he would want them to.
So I totally see that. Okay. I have two last words. You ready?
Yep.
Twitter.
No longer. Twitter's dead. Yeah.
Okay. So Twitter's dead. And so then the next word is, or the next letter is X.
Yeah. I knew that was where this is going. I'm gonna throw X a bone, and I'm gonna say X is everything app because that's what they want it to be. Now I don't know if it's gonna succeed, but when I think of X now, to Elon's credit, he wanted to kill Twitter. He's killed Twitter in my mind. Twitter's gone. X is here. X is gonna be something else. I don't know exactly what it will ultimately be, but they're trying to turn it into this everything app. So I'll go ahead and. That's the first thing that popped in. So
okay, well he just he's looking for a money transfer license here in the state of New York, and he's going to allow you to do telephone calls over that app shortly as well. I'm not betting against Elon Musk. I would never short the Elon Musk freight train because I don't want to end up like one of those 1920 silent movie villains.
Yeah.
But you wrote an amazing book, and I really wish you great success with this book because it's got everything. It's got intrigue, it's got ego, it's got business, and it's a book I hope business school professors pick up as well because it is the barbarians of the gate of your generation, our generation, It's mostly your generation, though. And it's called The Battle for the Bird. It's Jack Dorsey, Elon Musk, and the $44 billion fight for Twitter's soul, written by Kurt Wagner. And it was a real pleasure to have you on Open Book today. Thank you, sir.
Thank you for all the kind words. I appreciate getting the chance to talk.